CTV's W5. Living strictly by the good book.
God's law is above and beyond any human law.
Where faith is challenged and innocence shattered.
I felt like ending my life.
By a religion's darkest doctrines.
This is an organization that's supposed to love and protect children.
And no one will act.
Why won't you call the police on pedophiles?
Avery Haynes.
Court documents obtained by W5
investigates claims of abuse and denial.
Who do you turn to? Who do you have as support?
When victims plead for justice.
And he said he didn't do anything, so there's nothing that we can do.
Scripture shields the accused.
There has to be a confession or two witnesses.
Survivors are shunned by families and the congregation.
They are brainwashing everybody.
When blind faith turns a blind eye.
And he told me that I'm a liar.
Here is Kevin Newman.
Hello and thanks for joining us. This week, a full edition W5 investigation into an alleged worldwide sex abuse cover-up involving a group that you may least expect, the Jehovah's Witnesses. The sect is facing lawsuits in Canada and many other countries, alleging its doctrine victimizes abused children. W5's Avery Haynes travels to London, New York, California, and across Canada to hear from victims of abuse who allege that religious rules and intimidation ensure that trauma is rarely, if ever, reported to police.
When you think of Jehovah's Witnesses, you probably think of something like this.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you? I'm good, how are you? Good.
My name's Parker, this is Spike.
Polite disciples going door to door, gently spreading Jehovah's word. But the doorstep conversations on this day are anything but routine.
We're just informing people about a dangerous group that's in your backyard.
A dangerous what?
A dangerous group.
What dangerous group?
The Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's right, they're warning people about the Christian sect they once called their own.
They hide pedophiles.
They say the Jehovah's Witnesses organization is a secretive, destructive, and controlling group. A group whose policies have ignored child sex abuse while protecting known pedophiles from police.
Before, witnesses would be afraid to speak up and talk because they would be disfellowshipped and they'd lose their family.
They call themselves the Vast Apostate Army. An apostate is someone who has abandoned their faith. Within the Jehovah's Witnesses ranks, it's high up on the list of sins. These former Jehovah's Witnesses have come to this quaint town of Warwick, New York, because just down the road is the world headquarters of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They call it Bethel, the house of God, sprawling over 250 acres. 800 people live and work here, including the group's legal advisors, support staff, and the governing body. 8 men who establish and supervise Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine.
They just opened a new headquarters right in your town, and they protect pedophiles, and we want you guys to know.
They actually have some policies in place that allow these predators to be going door to door.
Tricia Frangina traveled here from Edmonton. A long, expensive trip that was worth it to protest a religious group that she says stole her childhood.
As a child, every night that you went to bed, you believed this may be your last night. You may not wake up.
Of course, it was always constantly that Armageddon could be coming at any minute.
What does Armageddon look like in the world of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
In my head, it was giant fireballs coming out of the sky and people screaming and dying in front of me.
A fiery death wasn't the only thing that scared Tricia. In fact, in a way, her own world had already ended. Since she was a child, she says, she had been abused by someone she should have been able to trust the most.
Can you talk to me about the kind of abuse that you suffered?
Sexual abuse from my father. The abuse started as soon as I was born until I was approximately 14 years old.
And which one is you?
This one.
Tricia says her mother suspected something was going on and went to the church elders for advice.
They basically told her that she wasn't fulfilling her wifely duties and that she had to be a more submissive wife and make her husband happier.
She's told you need to be servicing your husband more?
Yeah.
And where does that sit in your heart, and how does it sit?
It's heavy. I've gone through bouts of severe depression where I felt like ending my life because I was so unheard when I was basically screaming for help as a child.
Eventually, Tricia found the courage to go to an elder herself when she was 12. Help is not what she found.
And I explained to him what was going on, and he said, I don't have any proof and I don't have any witnesses, so I need to respect my family and not to bring it up again.
You told an elder that your dad was sexually abusing you, and he said, show us the proof?
Mm-hmm. They put the onus on the victim to produce 2 credible eyewitnesses to their assault. And by credible eyewitnesses, they mean other Jehovah's Witnesses that saw it with their own eyes.
It's actually called the 2-witness rule, inspired by passages from both testaments of the Bible.
So it's not as though the Jehovah's Witnesses have just made up their rules. I mean, they've taken stuff from within their translation of the Bible to validate their policies.
Yeah, absolutely.
André Gagné is a theology studies professor at Montreal's Concordia University.
You find a passage here in Deuteronomy chapter 19. No single witness may convict another for any error or any sin that he may commit. On the testimony of 2 witnesses or on the testimony of 3 witnesses, the matter should be established.
No single witness may convict. Biblical words Jehovah's Witnesses take literally.
But if there's not 2 witnesses, it's up to Jehovah.
Absolutely. They have what is called a theocratic worldview, meaning that God's law is above and beyond any human law. If I have to submit to any kind of law, I'm going to submit to God's law.
These videos, produced for the Jehovah's Witnesses website, show happy and carefree worshipers. What they don't show, the sheltered lives, the strict rules meant to protect against the Satan-led outside world. Witnesses are required to spend hours spreading Jehovah's word door to door and at street corner carts like these. They don't celebrate holidays, no Christmases, no birthdays. And those who don't obey the rules risk being shunned by friends and family.
You have very, very little connection with the outside world. Your entire world is that. So if you're shunned from that, who do you turn to? Who do you have as support? It's very difficult.
And Jehovah's Witnesses believe in Armageddon, the final battle between God and all wicked humans. They believe it'll happen any day now.
Armageddon is a battle. It's a battle against the forces of darkness, and the only way to be saved is to actually follow Jehovah and adopt our interpretation of the Bible. That's essentially it.
Perhaps the most controversial of their beliefs has been their policy on what to do with child sexual abuse allegations.
Court documents obtained by W5 show that Jehovah's Witnesses elders are instructed to keep a record of every single child sexual abuse allegation and then forward those allegations onto the organization's own legal department. Now, in many countries, including here in Canada, the law requires that allegations like that be dealt with by police. And yet there's ample evidence that calling the police has not been the regular practice of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Back in New York,
excuse me, folks, can I have a moment of your time?
One of the protesters does inspire Jehovah's Witnesses to call police. His name is Zeb Leatherman, and when he's not peacefully handing out flyers,
Howdy, folks.
He's doing this.
Just another day in the office.
Zeb strolls in and interrupts Jehovah's Witnesses' services.
We have a special announcement. It's concerning the 2-witness rule.
Telling the congregation their religious sect has some dark secrets.
We're going to ask you to leave, sir.
And this hasn't happened just once. For the past month, Zeb has driven some 4,000 kilometers across the United States, stopping uninvited at 60 Jehovah's Witnesses churches, which are called Kingdom Halls.
Our Heavenly Father, We don't have to listen to these men anymore. Let's go. And all that happens is we wind up sweeping these cases under the rug.
Okay, let's go. That's actually trespassing.
No, it's
by
not.
doing that.
You're invited. It's a public meeting.
What's going through your mind when you open those doors to the Kingdom Hall and know what you're about to do?
Pretty scared, but is there another way? I don't know another way right now, so I stick with this one.
Get off the premises. I'm calling the police.
Really?
Yes. So come on.
They usually call the police, and then they usually grab me, manhandle me, and throw me out.
Hold on. Hey.
Why won't you call the police on pedophiles?
Hey.
It's the only way I personally know that I can really make a difference. I don't like doing it. It doesn't feel right. And some places it might be illegal, but I don't know another way to teach that many people at one point in time.
You come in here to disrupt us.
I am. I'm trying to tear down the tower.
Zeb was born into a Jehovah's Witness family, but left in his 20s when he started doubting their strict interpretation of the Bible, including that two-witness rule. Now, his entire family shuns him. What's your point? Why are you doing this?
Because my ultimate goal is to free my family from this cult.
Today, Zeb won't be alone. When he slips into this Kingdom Hall, just outside the religious group's world headquarters, a dozen of his fellow protesters will join him. They've sneaked in and spread out among the congregation. And as soon as the opening hymn ends, they start the interruptions, camera phones rolling.
If I could just have your attention for a moment, guys. I want you to ask your elders about the two-witness rule, because the authorities are not called when children are abused.
The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York is being investigated. I'm talking here, sir. I'm sorry.
We're asking you very nicely at this time to leave.
So please Google all you can, folks. Learn all you can so that you can maybe escape this cult.
Abandoning their hope.
I have no more time in my life for you guys. I'm done with this whole thing, man.
When all faith is lost.
It really does destroy your soul.
When W5 continues.
We're back with NBC News In Depth tonight, an exclusive investigation into yet another religious organization hit with sexual abuse allegations. The Jehovah's Witnesses have settled 9 lawsuits alleging church policies protected men who abused children for many years. In settling, the church did not acknowledge wrongdoing. Now, evidence has surfaced that leaders did know about some of the men, but apparently never informed authorities. Our senior investigative correspondent, Lisa Myers, has our exclusive report tonight in depth.
Frederick McLean is among the country's most wanted fugitives, accused of molesting children for almost a decade.
His typical victims were young girls, I think starting around 5 or 6 years old.
Authorities say McLean, who restored race cars, was a respected leader in this congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses.
His role in the church was significant because we believe that his participation in the church gave him access to his victims.
The Jehovah's Witnesses recently agreed to pay to settle a lawsuit that alleged the church knew or should have known McLean was a pedophile. One of 9 similar cases church headquarters settled without admitting wrongdoing.
But internal church records now coming to light in those lawsuits show that the church knew for years that some prominent members were sexually abusing children and did little.
Example, James Henderson. Documents showed the church knew he was abusing kids as early as the 1970s and stripped him of his leadership role for a while, but apparently never alerted police. He was finally arrested in 1994 and went to prison, having molested children for 2 decades. Another church leader, Alvin Hurd, confessed to the church in 1981 that he'd abused 3 children, ages 5, 9, and 11. His local congregation kicked him out and alerted church headquarters. But again, the church apparently never notified police. Hurd, now in prison, admits he molested other children until 2003.
The policies and procedures enacted by Jehovah's Witnesses protect pedophiles rather than protect the children.
Barbara Anderson, a former Jehovah's Witness, is an outspoken critic of the church on this issue. She says the church prefers to keep an abuser's confession confidential, treating abuse more as a sin than as a crime.
They do not report child abuse to the authorities unless it's mandated by a state for the clergy to do so.
The church declined to speak on camera, but in a statement wrote that it does not condone or protect child molesters, that cases within the church are rare, that members have the right to report the crime to authorities, and that church elders comply with child abuse reporting laws. But not all states require clergy to report child sexual abuse. That means some abusers get caught only if victims finally come forward, like Frederick McLean's accusers, who now want this alleged molester taken off the streets. Lisa Myers, NBC News, Washington.
An investigation into child sexual abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses and accusations that religious leaders led a cover-up within some of the group's 14,000 U.S. congregations. Our colleagues from the Center for Investigative Reporting obtained confidential memos shedding new light on the revelations. Special correspondent Trey Bundy has the story from Reveal, a new website, radio show, and podcast run by the center.
At a convention of Jehovah's Witnesses in California, new members are taking the plunge.
At your baptism, you said yes.
They're joining more than 8 million members worldwide. Believers are taught to renounce secular society because it's controlled by Satan, and not to socialize too much with outsiders. But charges of sexual abuse have brought this insular community under greater scrutiny. And now, in this San Francisco courtroom, the first child abuse case against the Jehovah's Witnesses to go to trial is underway.
See, the next matter on the calendar.
Candace Conti is suing the organization for failing to protect her from a known child abuser when she was 9 years old.
If I were to sum up our goals of this case, it was to attack the policies and procedures that were in place that let a serial molester continue to molest children.
Conti's lawyer says instructions from Jehovah's Witness leaders have enabled child molesters.
The instructions were you keep these pedophiles secret.
The case hinges on letters from Jehovah's Witness leaders to the heads of local congregations. For almost 20 years, they've ordered them to send reports like this one for every known child abuser, to hide these cases from their congregations, and not to cooperate with law enforcement or the courts unless instructed to. They've refused judges' orders to turn over these abuse reports, so no one knows how many cases like Conti's are out there.
Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse of any form.
The Jehovah's Witnesses insist that they comply with the law, and their lawyers argue that the First Amendment gives them the right to set child abuse policies as they see fit.
Religious beliefs and standards of Jehovah's Witnesses were at play in this case from start to finish.
The religious beliefs come from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in Brooklyn, which has often used the First Amendment to defend its policies of separation. In 1943, it even won a Supreme Court case, arguing that school children should not be forced to pledge allegiance to the flag.
May it please the court, James McCabe on behalf of the North Fremont
Watchtower lawyers, who refuse to speak with us, are again claiming a First Amendment defense to keep child abuse in its congregations secret.
And the elders are counseled in that letter to give special heed to the counsel to not reveal the confidential talk of another. Quoting from the Bible book of Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 9.
Candace Conti was part of a Jehovah's Witness congregation in Fremont, California. She was often grouped with adults to go knocking on doors, including this man, Jonathan Kendrick.
He was very dominating, very domineering, he commanded a presence.
She says Kendrick would take advantage of their time door knocking to find ways to be alone with her.
Jonathan Kendrick molested me as a child. I really kind of pushed everything down and tried not to think about it as much as I could.
What no one in Conti's family knew was that Jonathan Kendrick had admitted to molesting another child a year earlier.
Regarding possible sexual abuse.
Michael Clark, an elder in the congregation, was asked about it in this deposition.
Do you recall becoming aware of a report of sexual abuse of a child by Jonathan Kendrick?
Yes.
When did you first become aware of such a report?
He had called us to his home to discuss or to confess to an incident with his stepdaughter.
Clark never called the police. He followed Watchtower protocol. He wrote to New York headquarters asking how to deal with Kendrick's confession. They told him not to investigate the matter further. Instead, they said, provide him with strong scriptural counsel to avoid a repetition of such a serious offense.
We don't make that public to the congregation. That's confidential.
The elders did not warn other members that one of their own was a child abuser.
And that's the policy and the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses that you learned as an elder, correct?
Yes.
Clark says the elders told Kendrick not to be alone with children, but he was still allowed to join in congregation activities that included minors. A year later, one of those minors was Candace Conti.
And I don't think it ever left. I know it never left me. You know, it's always there. And it was just probably one of those days that, you know, I just felt it.
Conti kept quiet about the abuse until years later when she discovered on a sex offender registry that he had gone on to molest another young girl. She decided to sue the Watchtower.
I think after I had found that out, I had this sense of guilt. You know, what if I did something? What if I hadn't been such a coward? What if I had done something to maybe protect this other child, you know? I knew what he was capable of, but I didn't do anything, you know? And then now look what happened.
I drove to Oakley, California, where Kendrick had moved when he left Conti's congregation. I met the girl Conti had found. She agreed to talk to us if we didn't show her face.
When I was a little girl, like probably about 6 or 7, Jonathan Kendrick had abused me.
She blames the Watchtower's secrecy for enabling Kendrick to marry into her family and target her. The family sued the Jehovah's Witnesses.
They knew that he had a past, and they kept it from us.
When Kendrick moved to the Oakley congregation, no one was told he was a child molester. Not even Roger Bentley, who served as an elder there for 30 years. He reviewed this letter of introduction from Kendrick's old congregation.
There's no indication at all that he's guilty of child abuse.
So no mention of child abuse, but any mention of children?
Well, if you read it, it very specifically says he's a very interesting individual who has taken the lead with some young ones in the congregation and helped them from veering off course. That's not a child abuser. That's a recommendation. That's a very specific recommendation. Oh, relax, he's good with kids.
I've spent months trying to interview Watchtower leaders, but they wouldn't talk to me. Instead, they sent a statement saying they comply with reporting laws, they do not shield abusers from law enforcement, and are committed to preventing child abuse. And in one of the dozen lawsuits I've been following, Watchtower supervisor Richard Ash was asked if the organization has a responsibility to protect children from abuse.
But within the congregation, ours is a spiritual protection. When we're talking about physical protection, that's up to the secular authorities to provide. And so
he was asked about the Watchtower's Bible-based directives to keep child abuse cases confidential.
It states in paragraph 3, there is a time to keep quiet when your words should prove to be few. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
You know, Mr. Joe, object to that. It's a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of association.
The courts continue to grapple with the question, should freedom of religion outweigh the responsibility to protect children? In Candace Conti's case, the jury overrode the First Amendment claims and decided the Watchtower and the North Fremont congregation were negligent and did not adequately protect her from abuse. Kendrick maintains he never molested her. Pending appeal, she was awarded more than $15 million in compensation and damages. It's the first time a jury has ordered the Watchtower to pay for its child abuse policies. But for Kendrick's other victim, her case against the Watchtower was thrown out. Even though Kendrick confessed to the abuse in this deposition and served about 8 months in jail, the judge affirmed that the Watchtower's policies were protected by the First Amendment. It was not liable because the abuse occurred at home and not in the course of religious activity. The Watchtower had no obligation to warn the family about Kendrick's past. Kendrick is now free and still an active member of the Oakley congregation.
The fact that Jonathan Kendrick is still a member of Good Standings is absolutely ridiculous. It's scary. I mean, the fact that he still has access to children. And really, my parents didn't have the power to know that Jonathan Kendrick was a child abuser. Let's give the parents the power to be able to protect their children. And that's what these organizations are hiding.
Despite the huge verdict against the Watchtower, the organization is sticking to its policies. In fact, it just released another confidential memo reminding elders to keep quiet about child abuse. I'm Trey Bundy from Reveal for the NewsHour.
Two years ago, elders from this church heard a shocking story. This young woman told them her father was sexually abusing her. The elders called her a liar.
I said to them, well, what are you meant to do then if he's doing something wrong? And they said, come to us and you'll deal with it. And I said to them, well, I've already spoken to you and you've told me I'm a liar.
The elder sent her home to her father. They didn't tell her that 3 years earlier he'd confessed to them that he was abusing her sister. Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a gathering of the church that let this happen. Over 6,000 Jehovah's Witnesses are in town for their district convention. Panorama is here too. We're looking for answers from the leaders of an organization that's under fire, facing mounting allegations that it's shielding abusers, silencing victims, and putting children at risk.
It's a worldwide problem that is of epidemic proportions within the organization, and no one knows about it unless your child was molested.
Stevenson is on the Ayrshire coast in Scotland. It's a quiet holiday resort, a close-knit town, and home to a thriving community of Jehovah's Witnesses. Door-to-door service, Bible studies and conventions were at the heart of family life for this young woman. But now she's left the church, which she says betrayed her. She doesn't want to be recognised. She had a strict religious upbringing, her parents wedded to the biblical principle that the father is head of the household.
We'd pray together kind of thing. I mean, we'd pray before meals and we'd pray before going to bed and ask God for help and ask God for forgiveness for anything we've done wrong that day. He was very strict. I was scared of my dad for years. I was really frightened of him.
She and her sister spent hours playing alone. Their father taught them that outside influences were bad. He prohibited friendships outside the church. But from the age of 11, her make-believe games hid a painful truth. Her father had started to abuse her.
I was in my bed one night and that's when my dad came through and started touching me and feeling me. I just lay there hoping it would go away. Witness statement at Salcoot's police office. Over the years since I was 11 until I was 15, my dad had done things to me that he shouldn't have done, like rub my breasts, finger me and try to have sex with me. I remember when we were in Perth, we were staying in a tent. He started to touch me and he made me touch him and he made me put his penis in my mouth and things like that.
Were you scared?
Terrified. There was one time my dad had told me if I'd ever told anyone about this, he would rip me apart.
For years, she kept quiet. But one Sunday, after a meeting at the Kingdom Hall, she asked to see church elders. She needed their help.
We just told them everything that happened.
Did they tell you that this was serious, that you should go to the police, that they would go to the police for you?
No, they didn't tell me anything like that. They didn't make any mention of the police.
They said they'd deal with it.
After that, they'd called my father in, and they had a very, very long chat with him. And then eventually he came out and we went home, and that was the end of it.
When confronted, Ian Cousins confessed he was abusing his daughter. He said he was sorry, so the elder sent him home with her. The abuse continued. Cousins was reproved or admonished publicly by the elders, but church policy meant that no one was told why, not even his younger daughter.
It was announced on the platform that Ian Cousins has been reproved, and after that I went to one of the elders and asked, well, why has he been reproved? And he said it's because of something he did wrong, but he wouldn't tell me what it was.
Even when her sister moved out, sick of the abuse, Alison still didn't know why. She missed her sister and was lonely. With one daughter gone, Ian Cousins turned on the other. It all began with an innocent goodnight kiss.
I gave him a kiss, like a peck in the lips, and then I tried to get up to walk away, and he pulled me down and he forced his tongue through my teeth, my clenched teeth, and he tried to put the blame on me and said, do you really think you should be doing that?
He blamed you? It wasn't long before the abuse got worse. One day, her father was accused of assaulting one of Alison's friends. She had to do something, but had nowhere to turn, nowhere except the Kingdom Hall. She asked to see a church elder.
I told him everything that had happened, and what my dad had done to me, and he said that he didn't believe me at all, and he said that I was a liar, and that my dad would never do such a thing, and that my dad was such a nice man.
Like her sister, she was sent home. Her father, the nice man, was free to continue abusing her. So she gave the elders an ultimatum. Either they did something, or she'd go to the police. They did nothing.
I have told the police about my dad because I am concerned that he has contact with other young girls through the church.
Some of these people gave good statements and very, very positive in their attitude and support of Alison and her sister. Other people felt that they didn't want to be involved and gave a negative statement, and some people refused to speak to us altogether.
Why?
I have no idea why. They just refused to speak to the police.
Were they Jehovah's Witnesses?
I believe they were.
But they wouldn't help?
They wouldn't give a statement to us, no.
Only during the police investigation did the whole story become clear to Alison Cousins. Only now did she discover her sister had been abused too. Only now did she find out that her father confessed to elders 3 years earlier. Yet no one had warned her, his next victim.
Nobody told me anything. They all basically kept it all under wraps and told nobody what had happened.
What they did was keep a record of her father's name and confession on a church database, a register of suspected and convicted paedophiles to be monitored. We asked Alison Cousins to obtain a copy of her records using the Data Protection Act. There, in black and white, was proof that the Jehovah's Witnesses had known for 3 years that her father was a self-confessed paedophile. Yet far from monitoring him, the elders twice turned a blind eye to his abuse of his daughters. When he confessed to church elders, Cousins got a mild rebuke. When he confessed in court, he got 5 years in jail.
I believe we were the last to know. They had told several people before coming to the police, and these people had not reported it either to the police or the social services. We have a duty to protect, and if we're not told, we're unable to protect.
New York, the capital of big business, and a fitting home for one of the largest and richest religious organizations in the world. From here, the Jehovah's Witnesses control over 6 million members. From here, the worldwide headquarters in Brooklyn Heights, every policy, every guideline is dictated. Visitors are welcome, and one message is clear. In this organization, you adhere to God's word. Every month, 50,000 Bibles come off the press, ready to be sold worldwide. But this too is where they keep records of suspected and convicted paedophiles in their ranks. Bill Bowen, a lifelong member, has resigned as an elder. He says the men at the top are protecting the church, not the children.
They do not want people to know that they have this problem. And by covering it up, they just hurt one person. By letting it out, then they hurt the image of the church.
Elders must report abuse to the church's legal desk. Only if the law demands it must they contact the police. If it doesn't, they may be told they have a moral duty to call them, but often it seems to stop here. It seems to go no further than the church's own secret database.
Every detail is written down about what happened, where it happened, when it happened, how it happened.
So you're saying the organization has its own sexual offenders register, if you like?
That's exactly right.
That it's keeping to itself and not showing others?
Exactly right. These men remain anonymous to anyone outside the organization and anyone really inside the organization unless you are personally reporting the matter.
So was this the policy back in Stevenson that let Ian Cousins continue to abuse his daughters? The elders have stepped down and refused to talk to us, so we asked the man sent here to sort things out. Hello, Mr. Briggs. We're from BBC Panorama, as you know.
I know that.
We just want to ask you a few questions about the Ian Cousins case.
It's reasonable to really actually consider the brothers and sisters in the congregation that have had to undergo all this pressure. And so I would just leave it at that. That's all I have to say on the matter.
The database, Mr. Briggs. Why should the Jehovah's Witnesses keep a database of men who have confessed to being paedophiles, but the police aren't told? Do you think that's reasonable behaviour, Mr. Briggs? The latest name added to the list should be that of James Barrett. 3 days ago, clutching his Bible, this elder from Rugby was convicted of indecently assaulting 2 boys and sentenced to 2 years in prison. The church was told of the allegations 5 years ago, but Barrett denied them and was allowed to remain an elder. So how many names are on the secret database? We asked the headquarters in New York. They refused to tell us. Focusing on numbers isn't meaningful, they said. After a lifetime in the church, Bill Bowen tells a different story. How many names do you suspect are on that list?
23,720.
How do you know that?
I was contacted by sources within the church. I was given a figure of over 20,000. 2 different sources came back to me and said that number is actually more specific and gave me a figure of 23,720. They told me that they had accessed the internal database, and that figure was based on child molesters in the USA, Canada, and Europe. And that's the figure that they were given.
Over 20,000 names on a secret database. That's why these people say the church has to listen. With Bill Bowen, they're calling for the Jehovah's Witnesses to come clean about their record on child abuse. His campaign, Silent Lambs, has already heard from 5,000 victims. This candlelit vigil is for them.
Or is what they're doing, once it's found out, causing their own members to be deeply disturbed.
Heather Berry and her stepsister, Holly Brewer, have flown here from New Hampshire. The man who abused them has been jailed for a minimum of 56 years. He was Heather's father. Now Heather and Holly are breaking new ground. They're taking the Jehovah's Witnesses to court.
I'm Heather from New Hampshire. I don't want to tell my story, but
I've heard the word victim too many times today. And all of us are standing out here today. We're standing tall and proud and saying this happened and then it can't happen, and we're survivors. And we're fighting and we're not victims.
They're the first of those survivors to take their fight to court. They're claiming that not only did the church do nothing when they were abused, it ostracized and punished the family when they called the police.
I'm very glad I came. Like I said, I would do it again. And again, and again, and as many times as it takes to get a change in the policies and things that they hide constantly.
I'm really glad that the policy was talked about so much today. That it's an actual policy. It's not just a few elders that want to hide things. It comes from higher up.
It's a worldwide policy.
Yeah.
We asked the church for an interview to discuss the claims that they're putting thousands of children at risk. They offered us instead some videotapes.
Here we have it, a box full of tapes, in fact. Jehovah's Witnesses response, progressive understanding of paedophilia, education through publications, and one marked policies, and I'm told that's where we should get some answers.
That night we watched the tapes looking for those answers. In long letters, the organisation had told us the welfare of children is of paramount concern to them, but they have a forceful child protection policy. We wanted to see it spelled out.
We've heard the suggestion that our policies may not be adequate to cover the problem of child molestation, but that's not the case at all.
The policy couldn't be simpler. The elders should deal with all allegations of abuse.
I think that's a very good policy, that the elders, essentially would take charge of the situation of reporting the abuse to the authorities.
But the authorities they're told to contact aren't the police. It's their own legal desk.
Fact of the matter is, we have a very aggressive policy to handle child molestation in the congregation, and it is primarily designed to protect our children.
So how aggressive is it in practice? Just over a year ago, Bill Bowen rang the legal desk in New York, asking how he should handle an allegation of abuse in his congregation. The advice he was given has little to do with protecting the victim. He was told to go back to the man accused.
You just ask him again, now, is there anything to this? If he says no, then I would walk away from it. Yeah. Leave it for Jehovah. He'll bring it out. Yeah. But don't get yourself in a jam.
Leave it for Jehovah. That, according to thousands of victims, is the Jehovah's Witness child protection policy laid bare. No one knows more about that than Sarah Poisson. Holly Brewer and Heather Berry's mother knows her loyalty to the church cost her daughters dearly. Paul Berry, her husband, beat them. She suspected worse, that Heather was being sexually abused, and went to the elders.
I could tell from their looks on their faces that I'd done a bad thing. That I had spoken against my husband, which is a bad thing. And so their solution was that I should be a better wife and I should pray more. That was their solution. That's how I could stop him from battering us. I assumed they were right. They had to be right. Because they know everything, because they're God's representatives on earth.
She couldn't convince them, but she was convinced that Paul Berry was sexually abusing their daughter, Heather.
When I was about 3 years old, I started displaying behavior that no 3-year-old in their right mind would display. I was throwing stools out of 2-story windows, and I was, I went to Boston Children's Medical Hospital in the psychiatric ward when I was 3 because she found me stabbing myself with a screwdriver in the arm in the kitchen. He came to me in the blackened night, hands outstretched. There was no fight. The masked man slowly became familiar with my shape, gently rubbing his hands on me, every nook, cranny, and gate. My child, you are so sweet, so perfect and right. Then I knew nothing but defeat. I tried not to think about the abuse as much as possible. I mean, Like, there was the physical abuse, there was the verbal abuse, and there was the sexual abuse, and when none of it was happening, that was ideal, and that's what I tried to focus on the most.
And all the while, you were going to the Kingdom Hall every Sunday? You were going to meetings during the week?
We were going out door-to-door service.
Time and again, the girls were told to wait outside while their mother begged local elders for help. Time and again, they saw her sent home to pray harder and be a better wife. Holly, too, had her own story to tell. The story she'd kept secret from her mother. A story she knew by now the elders wouldn't want to hear. Her instinct was to tell the local policeman, but after years in the church, she just couldn't.
Holly would actually tell me that she was very angry about things at home, and she did, on more than several occasions, tell me that someday, Sergeant Zeller, I'm going to tell you something that happened to me. And I always told Holly, when you're ready, I'll be there. You know where I am.
Her mother saw the elders more than a dozen times, but remarkably, it never struck Sarah Poisson to look for help outside the church.
You can say that your children's lives are in danger, and in the same breath that you couldn't possibly go to the police. How can that be?
Because God would not want that. It would never have occurred to me. And even if it had, I would not have done it. Because he's a man. He's a baptized male, and he's a ministerial servant. And I was a woman, and they're kids. And that's even worse than being a woman. These things need to stay in this room. I heard that many, many times. You need to pray about it more. I can show you my Bible. It's paper thin. I still have it. It's all worn out. Did a lot of praying.
Even after you were told them that her father was sexually abusing Heather, nothing changed?
No. Well, yeah, things changed. They got a lot worse for me.
In the end, the decision was taken out of her hands. In school, bruises were noticed on her children. Social workers were told. They gave her a stark choice: leave your husband, or we take your children. But if she left him, she knew the church would cut her dead.
At that point, I had to make a decision between God and my kids. And I knew, well, at that time I knew, that if I chose my kids, I didn't have a prayer. But I didn't care anymore. So we lost everything. In one day.
Sarah Poisson had no life outside the Kingdom Hall. When the congregation cast her out, she had no choice but to move away. She didn't just lose every friend she had. Overnight, she was homeless, penniless, scraping a living to bring up her children. The friends they'd had openly shunned them. But with the family now free of the church, Holly could finally tell her mother the truth. Her stepfather had abused her too. When he tried to gain access to her younger sister, Holly finally did what the elders hadn't. She walked into the local police station.
It was clear to me that it was a life's crossing, a road to cross. Never any doubt in my mind that Holly could do it. It was a tremendous effort on her part, and it smacked of raw courage from beginning to end.
The Holly Brewer who walked into his office that day was a very changed, a very defiant young woman.
My earliest memory is like about 3 years old. My latest memory is 10 years old. And he gradually worked into being interested in me, to full-blown sex, intercourse, over those years.
It was a harrowing time. The police took Holly back to the house where the abuse had started.
He had a room that he had found in our very, very old house that was underneath the barn that you had to crawl through a hole to get to. And once you were in there, you were isolated from the entire house and from everything. And that's where everything would go down.
Would he kneel down on next to you or over you?
He'd sit anywhere, just sit and let me do whatever I was gonna do. Sit like this.
All right.
And just and I'd lean over.
Uh-huh. And did he tell you what he wanted you to do?
I knew after a while.
Okay.
She told the police exactly what Berry had wanted, of the brutal sexual assault she'd suffered throughout her childhood.
I had no vision of me growing up and being 16. I thought he was eventually going to kill me, and then I'd be free, and that's the way I looked at it.
You're doing good. It's crazy. It's really hard to come back here, I know that.
I know. There's so much. He'd say things like, "Thank you for obeying me." And he'd thank me for obeying him and reminding me that word, the obey word. That was a big thing.
Paul Berry was confident Holly would never go to the elders. Apart from anything else, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a clear rule on sin. They need 2 witnesses or a confession before they'll take action.
Do you remember?
As Holly told her story, it seemed to police that this rule in a strict religious community would have let the abuse continue.
So this is the same sheet that was here before?
All the same.
All right.
Sexual abuse of children is not to be tolerated. And I don't care what their reasoning was. It was faulted reasoning. They were wrong, and as far as I'm concerned, they were criminally negligent. That's my take on it.
Even with just the child's word, with 1 witness, with just the mother's word, without the 2 witnesses their Bible tells them they need.
Well, unfortunately, most kids don't have several witnesses observing them get raped. It's an unfortunate part of it.
It took nearly 4 years for the case to come to court. Paul Berry faced 17 charges of aggravated sexual assault.
I was holding Holly's hand, and she had a lot of pointy rings on, and she was squeezing my hand really tightly. And it took them a long time to get through the verdict because there were so many indictments. And when it was over, my hand was all blood and I didn't even feel it. And it was so powerful to be believed.
But not everyone did believe them. Even after he was convicted by a jury on all 17 indictments, 24 members of the Kingdom Hall turned up at the sentencing hearing. They all appeared to give character statements for Paul Berry.
He had already been found guilty, and they found room in their hearts to stand in front of that child and say, "We don't believe any of it." And what they were saying was they didn't believe the child, they didn't believe in the system of justice, they didn't believe the judge, they didn't believe the jury, they didn't believe anyone except themselves.
Everything they were saying was, he's such a fine worker. I've worked with him secularly, and, he always shows up to work on time, and he's such a good worker. Everybody said that, and also the second half was everybody started saying, he's babysat our kids hundreds of times. I would let him babysit our kids every day, and he's such a good worker. And I was just sitting there like, he's not on trial for being a negligent worker.
I can't imagine how badly she must have felt not to have been believed by elders in her own close-knit community. What a horrible blow to a child this must have been. Shame. Shame on them.
But another serious accusation is levelled against Jehovah's Witnesses. In their efforts to cover up abuse, they may even try to frustrate police investigations. In Birmingham, West Midlands police were told of a sexual assault by a Jehovah's Witness on a young boy. They asked local elders for help.
They were very reluctant to give up any information towards me. It was an uphill battle so far as the church was concerned with me, virtually at every turn. They actually said to me, unless I could provide 2 Jehovah's Witnesses who had actually seen the offence, then as far as they were concerned, the offence hadn't taken place.
The boy was Simon Brady. He was just 9 when he was abused by a member of this Kingdom Hall. He felt he could tell no one.
We're taught if you go to elders, if you want to be believed or you have a complaint about someone, then there has to be more than one of you. There has to be 2 people. There has to be more than one witness, basically. You know, what can I say? They want more than one witness. You know, how could I have gone to them? You know, they want to believe me. Statement of Simon Andrew Brady, age 18. I recall that one of the brothers of the congregation, a man known to me as Jaswan Patty, began to take an interest in me. I would have been 8 or 9 years old at the time.
Simon Brady's parents were going through a divorce. Jaswant Patty offered to help out, take him off his mother's hands.
He'd take me for drives after the meetings. He'd take me home from the congregation, you know, give me a lift home. I can remember one occasion he took me to his sister's flat while she was away on holiday. He said we'd go in and we'd check his sister's flat, and there he severely sexually abused me, basically. Like,
what did he do?
It was quite severe, to be honest with you. Like, it was severe. Like, you know. Even now to think of it, I don't. You know, it hurts now to talk about, to be honest with you. And I've done that once already, like, you know. And I find it very hard to talk about that anymore, basically. He dropped me off at home. I remember going to the bathroom and scrubbing with Dettol because I felt dirty at what had happened.
For years he said nothing, afraid the elders wouldn't believe him. When he finally did speak out, his instinct as a 9-year-old proved right.
It's not so much did they believe me, did they want to believe me, you know. They didn't want to believe me. I think they turned up at my house, you know. They weren't open-minded, and I think they'd already made their mind up even before they got to my house, you know.
The police did believe him, and they tracked down a second boy who'd been abused by Patty. But what happened next caused them serious concern. An elder confronted the victim's father, calling the man's son a liar. The father complained to the police, who warned the elder to stay away from the victims' families. His excuse was that as an elder, he had every right to investigate the case for himself.
It was his duty to test the evidence prior to the court case. I advised him that if that sort of behaviour continued, then if an allegation had been formally made, then I would have to investigate that particular person for offences to pervert the course of justice. And in fact, witness intimidation. The conversation did get a little bit heated towards the end, but obviously I'd got a duty to protect my complainants and witnesses to the case. I made sure and sent out the signal that I was prepared to protect them and take drastic steps, i.e. arresting people, if they breach that.
In Birmingham, as in New Hampshire, the elders supported the accused. Even after Patty was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in jail, they didn't waver. At the next meeting in the Kingdom Hall, the elders made sure the congregation knew where they stood.
There was an announcement given saying, as a body of elders, that's including every elder in Rubery, we feel as a body of elders, basically, this man is innocent, we believe he's innocent, and the Bethel have informed us they will do everything in their power to help this man.
I then made it my duty to actually speak to the legal services team of the Bethel in London and voice my disquiet about the lack of cooperation I'd had from start to finish from this inquiry.
Under police pressure, the elders did apologise and were demoted, though not sacked. The London headquarters, the Bethel, refused to discuss any specific case. They said this was because the elders had to respect the confidentiality of the victims. But the victims wanted answers. We again asked for an interview with their spokesman, Paul Gillies. When he refused, we phoned him, told him we were recording, and asked a simple question. Are elders told to report allegations of abuse to the police or not?
The elders' guideline is, if you get any single allegation of child abuse come to your attention, phone this office.
Why
and
phone
get
this
guidance.
office? Why not phone your local police station?
Well, you see, the first thing is we have to make sure for the protection of the child. That's
Is
our
it the
first
protection of the
priority.
child, or is it fair to ask you, isn't it the protection of the church that comes straight to mind there?
It is the protection of the child. We have a child protection policy.
It was a long conversation. We asked if he'd be prepared to answer the same questions on camera. He refused. So it was back to America and back to a Jehovah's Witness convention in Tulsa. We'd been told we'd find a member of the governing body here. Ted Jarretts is one of the men responsible for the church's child protection policy. For more than 2 months, we've been asking them for an interview. We want answers to some simple questions. Why do they keep their database of suspected paedophiles secret? Why don't they report all allegations of abuse to the police? Why do they send children back to the arms of their abusers? They'd refused to talk to us, but here at last, we had our chance.
Tell me about the database. How do you justify keeping a list of people, men in some cases, who have confessed to paedophilia, but you have not reported them to the authority? What justification is there for you to keep that list?
You have a privacy law. You have a directive from the European Union. You observe that, don't you?
So when allegations of abuse are made, it's all right to keep them private?
I think you were answered. That question was answered to your, should be to your satisfaction.
Can you answer it now?
I'm not going to repeat. I'll just tell you exactly that you can go and you see it in writing. It's all in print. You know, the Bible says, do not go beyond the things that are written. We don't go beyond the things that are written.
And that was that.
Let's move this way, please.
No doubt, no second thoughts. Just a simple belief that Jehovah will sort it out. A belief for which others, younger and more vulnerable, may continue to pay a price.
They're living in denial. Denial of what's happening to their children. And it's not a matter, you see, if they accept that, then they accept that there is a problem. So rather than admit that there's a problem, they will just let children go on and continue to be molested and not do anything about it.
A serial pedophile from San Diego admits his crimes on video. Now, Team 10 obtained this video that reveals he was a leader in a church community.
Investigator Mitch Blocker talked to people who claim this is just the beginning, and Jehovah's Witnesses covered up child abuse for years.
I did abuse him.
Admitted serial pedophile Gonzalo Campos fled the country. He may never see the inside of a prison cell.
Lo toqué sus partes privadas. I touched his private parts.
His on-camera admissions and a settlement worth millions may have to be enough for his victims. The Jehovah's Witnesses never told police about Campos, who was a church elder. He's never been charged with a crime.
Were you allowed to continue to give Bible study lessons to children?
Sí. Yes.
In this video deposition taken in 2011 during a civil lawsuit, Campos admitted he abused several children in his San Diego congregation from the early 1980s through the mid-90s.
He is a serial pedophile.
Erwin Zalkin represented the 7 victims who have come forward.
It's about accountability. It's about taking responsibility. It's about protection of children. It's about changing the way they operate.
Zalkin claims child abuse continues inside the Jehovah's Witness community. He claims church leaders, known as elders, and the Jehovah's Witnesses headquarters, known as the Watchtower, treat child abuse like a sin instead of a crime.
The elders are instructed that they are to report that up the chain to the Watchtower and before or not to authorities, that it is the Watchtower that will decide what happens.
Team 10 found the Watchtower has sent each congregation and its elders several confidential memos about how to handle child abuse starting in 1989. The original memo warns to be careful not to divulge information about personal matters, quoting scripture which says there is a time to keep quiet. Another memo from October 2012 outlines the current church policy It tells elders to call the legal department and contact your overseer. It says loving elders should take steps to protect children, especially when the one who has sexually abused a child will be allowed to remain a member. The Jehovah's Witnesses lawyer, Jim McCabe, explained how the church now handles abuse allegations.
Today, whenever there's an allegation of child abuse, and local congregation hears about it, they call headquarters and get instructions.
Team 10 learned Campos is still a member of the Jehovah's Witness Church. He lives in Mexico, but McCabe says he is not allowed to hold a leadership position. We also learned Campos is just one of thousands of alleged abusers the Jehovah's Witnesses know about. A database detailing more than 23,000 allegations of abuse was taken from church headquarters and revealed to the public in 2002.
Does the church always report allegations of child abuse to police?
No. Under biblical law, a man can only be convicted on the testimony of 2 or more witnesses.
McCabe, who is a Jehovah's Witness and elder of his La Jolla church, said the Jehovah's Witnesses have always reported abuse allegations to police when required by law. It became California law in 1997.
Our problem is that there are some bad men that sneak into an organization. They've snuck into our organization, they've snuck into other organizations. When we discover who they are and what they are, we take the action that we can take as a religious organization.
Do you think it's widely known that there are sexual abuse problems inside the Jehovah's Witness Church? No, and it needs to be brought to the public's attention.
We wish we could undo what has been done, but it can't be.
San Diego lawyer Erwin Zalkin says he plans to file more lawsuits against the Jehovah's Witnesses. Some of those cases stem from other abuse here in San Diego.
All right, so how much are these of the settlement are the local churches responsible for?
We'd love to know. Probably millions, but that's confidential. It's sealed under a court order.
Interesting.
Yeah, he won't tell us.
Okay, thank you, Mitch.
In June, 53-year-old Mark Sewell from Barry was jailed for 14 years after being found guilty of 8 historic sex offences. The judge at Merthyr Crown Court said Sewell had used his position of power as an elder in the Jehovah's Witnesses to exploit and abuse women and children.
It's a paedophile's paradise because of the way the 2-witness rule protects the paedophile, the sex abuser, over and above that of the child.
There have been 25 similar convictions in Jehovah's Witness congregations across the UK in the last 4 years. Tonight, 2 of Mark Sewell's victims talked to Wales This Week, claiming that the organisation has kept allegations of abuse hidden.
Alarm bell should have been ringing after more than one person had named Mr. Sewell. He'd done stuff previous to other people.
I don't know whether they think they're outside of the law or whether they just don't want the law finding out about what's going on.
If you're prepared to die for your flock, I think you should be prepared to come to court for your flock.
It's been described as the greatest preaching campaign the world has ever known. Jehovah's Witnesses are a close-knit community of evangelical Christians well known for going door to door, handing out literature about their faith. They do not have blood transfusions, serve in the military, celebrate Christmas or birthdays. But now claims are emerging from some past and present members of the church that there may be a pattern of sex abuse that the organisation has not only failed to report, but has actually helped to keep from the authorities.
He would sort of lay next to me and pull me up on top of him. He would get into bed with me in the night wearing just his underpants. He came into the bathroom when I was in the shower.
Karen Morgan was 12 when Mark Sewell started abusing her. She reported it to her parents, but she was told she had misunderstood her uncle's affections.
They didn't like to think that somebody who supposedly loves Jehovah would be doing things like that to me.
Karen and her family were members of the Kingdom Hall in Barry. As another member of the congregation, Mark Sewell was not only a brother to them in church terms, he also became a real member of the family after he married Karen's aunt.
It went without saying, I guess, that I became close to Mark. I used to stay over their house every Thursday night. Most weekends we would all be at their house.
It was when she was about 12 or 13. She told me that she didn't like the way Mark was kissing her. I simply thought that she meant he was being a bit over-friendly, touching, kissing when we got there or when we left. So the whole thing went over my head. A few months later, she said to me again she didn't like the way Mark was kissing her. On both occasions, I actually went to see Mark and said, do you mind toning down the affection, because Karen's probably a bit embarrassed. I had no idea that what she was actually trying to say was that there was something more going on.
Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the Bible is the literal translation of God's Word. It says when a brother has sinned, you should first confront him before going elsewhere. Karen was now in a particularly awkward situation. She had to face Sewell in a series of meetings at his home.
It was really embarrassing to have to sit in front of my auntie and my mum and dad and him, so I just kept it quite brief. And he just sat there and said, oh no, she's lying, or no, she's misunderstood that.
With no one fully grasping what was happening to her, the abuse continued for another 2 years.
I was 16, I was a mess by this point. I was self-harming, I was still going to meetings 3 times a week, and 2 of those meetings, him and my auntie were there.
Mark and Cora are 2 former Jehovah's Witnesses who now campaign to give a voice to victims like Karen. Based in Cheltenham, the couple helped launch Advocates for the Awareness of Watchtower Abuses, or AWA. The Watchtower is the Jehovah's headquarters in New York. Mark and Cora feel the church is instilling a culture of undue influence, which violates the basic human rights of its members, especially in the protection of children.
We are trying to change the whole policy of the way that they look at the individual that's being accused, because this is somebody that can continue to carry on abusing people. They don't see it as a crime. They see it as a sin. They see it as a weakness of that person.
The couple say it was only through the campaign that they started to become aware of the scale of what was really happening. The same story was being repeated around the world.
The secrecy surrounding any allegations of abuse, of molestation or rape, are so tightly controlled by the organisation that most Jehovah's Witnesses, your average witness, does not know anything about it.
Each congregation is served by a body of elders who are there to help, guide and protect the 100-strong congregation. In the 2 years that Karen was being abused, businessman Sewell had been made a church elder. He was now in a position of considerable trust, making it much harder for Karen to be believed. It was only when she decided to write it all down that eventually it did go before a committee of elders.
That was the shocking document. It was the first time when she was about 16 that we realised that what had been going on was not just over-affectionate, but it was actually inappropriate touching and worse.
It is common practice for the elders to set up a judicial committee to investigate the allegation. Karen would have to face her abuser once again.
It was me and my dad and 3 elders, plus Mark, all sitting in a little room at the Kingdom Hall, with the elders saying, right, tell us what he did to you.
Wales This Week spoke to the former head of South Wales CID, Wyn Phillips, who now specialises in child protection issues. He stresses that the victim should always be the main priority in any investigation.
You can't just assume that a victim will want to face a perpetrator, a suspect. I mean, it's very dangerous. These investigations must be victim-based. They must take into consideration the anxieties, the distress, the feelings of the victim.
It was one word against another, and it also hinged on a literal translation from the Bible.
They have this 2-witness rule which covers everything, so it could be someone smoked, they would have to be seen by 2 separate people, or it could be that a child has been abused and that abuse would have to be seen by 2 separate people. Well, When does anyone ever see a child get abused?
It's a paedophile's paradise because of the way the two-witness rule protects the paedophile, the sex abuser, over and above that of the child.
Mark and Cora say the fundamental reasons there's such an issue revolve around the misguided application of the two-witness rule and the instruction that elders must handle accusations internally.
The elders do one thing, and they are under strict instructions to do this, and that's to go straight to branch office. Not to the authorities, not to the police. They are under strict instructions to record the event and keep it in a confidential congregation file under a confidentiality clause. And it goes nowhere.
I was informed that actually Karen's incident of child abuse it wasn't logged as child abuse because there was only one person saying it, which was her, and so it didn't go any further.
Mark and Cora claim that the elders are governed by what is written in a secret manual called Shepherd, the Flock of God.
Most elders will deny they even have it. In fact, there are instructions that they are not to leave it out on a table, even for their wives to see. Within that book, it gives very specific instructions on child abuse and how it should be handled by the elders.
It's not secret in that it's all bad and we don't want people to know about it, but it's probably a secret in that it would be on a need-to-know basis, and that most of the congregation wouldn't need to know.
It says things such as, well, how mature are the parents? Are they spiritually mature? How solid is the child? Where are they coming from? So they're not looking at it from the right angles. They're looking at it from very much a perspective of protecting the organisation first and foremost. They are fundamentally flawed when it comes to protecting the child. And that is very clear, not from our point of view, but from their own literature.
Perhaps some more transparency would be a good thing.
The book tells elders they should never suggest that a victim should not go to the police. It says they should inform victims that it's their personal decision. However, it clearly states this information should only be given if directly asked, and only after guidance has been sought from the branch office or Bethel.
Your average man on the street knows if you see somebody doing that, you phone the police. It doesn't have to go to the Bethel all the time.
There is only one port of call, I think, when you have allegations of serious crime. That is to the law enforcement agencies. Without the proper judicial system being implemented, then it's nigh on impossible to decide on someone's guilt.
They have the title of an elder, but they could be a plumber, heating engineer, it could be somebody who does electrics, a window cleaner. They're not trained counsellors or specialists or anything. They're just normal people.
Without another witness to back up Karen's allegations, the elders allowed the 53-year-old grandfather to stay in the congregation, and Karen was told to keep quiet.
If the elders tell you don't talk about this to anyone else, then you do as you're told.
It's impressed on you constantly that you must not bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. It's got nothing to do with that at all. It's all to do with how the watchtower looks, this squeaky clean image that they like to have.
In desperation, Karen's dad wrote to the Jehovah's UK headquarters in London to ask for advice on what to do next. It was only at this stage that they were finally advised to go to the police.
The letter back at that time from the society was very good and very clear. It did encourage in the first paragraph that the victim might want to go to the police. And if the victim didn't, it said the parents perhaps should think about it. And then the third point made was that if the parents and the victim don't, then each elder should search their own conscience as to whether they should go to the police. They didn't, but we did.
But without the backing of the organisation, Karen was once again unsuccessful.
None of the elders came to the police to back up anything I'd said. So I think because it was literally me against him, they just didn't want to take it to court.
If you're prepared to die for your flock, I think you should be prepared to come to court for your flock.
Just 1 month later, someone else claimed they had also been attacked.
Another lady came forward and she informed me of an incident where she had been raped by Mark Sewell. Eventually, a committee was formed they would not link the two incidences, so they would not call it a two-witness incident, which Jehovah's Witnesses need, because one was a child and one was an adult.
This technicality meant that Sewell had got away with it once again. But this time the decision was taken to remove him from the congregation because of his attitude during the investigation.
There would have just been an announcement made from the platform, Mark Sewell is being disfellowshipped, but nobody would have been told why.
Being disfellowshipped is an experience which is all too familiar for Mark and Cora. They recall the way they were shunned by their own congregation after they got married for a second time.
When someone is disfellowshipped, it leads many to suicide. And we decided to be there for the announcement. We were very strong. We believed in exactly what we did when we got married. And we went to every single meeting that was there for 3 years, with nobody talking to us, the scorns, the looks.
2 years after Sewell had been disfellowshipped, another woman came forward. This time it was someone who worked for him.
I was on duty at the back of the Kingdom Hall when a lady who's not a Jehovah's Witness came in crying, very, very upset and annoyed. She made a claim that Mark Sewell had sexually molested her in his car, made inappropriate suggestions, and she wanted something done about it.
One incident, he rubbed his particle up against my backside. Other incident, he locked me in a car and asked for sex. He also would ask me to go and sit on his lap, give him a kiss. He'd very often come into the office and massage me.
Tina Guy was 25 years old and claimed she'd been suffering abuse from Sewell for 18 months. But she says her allegations also fell on deaf ears, as she was told that the Jehovah's Witnesses could not do anything about someone who was disfellowshipped.
They dismissed anything untoward happened towards me, because they said Mark was just a jovial person. He wasn't actually like that. But they said they would have a word with him and they'd let me know what was going to happen.
Because Mark Sewell at that time was disfellowshipped, nothing was done about it because he was not technically a Jehovah's Witness.
But this didn't mean he couldn't attend meetings. Sewell would still be able to watch, observe, and the church remained very much part of his life.
When you're disfellowshipped, you're still allowed to attend the meetings. It means that no one is allowed to talk to you.
Tina Guy eventually won an employment tribunal against Sewell for sexual harassment. Just 1 year later, he had been accepted back into the congregation. As part of their campaign, Mark and Cora questioned the logic behind being reinstated after disfellowshipping merely due to the passing of time.
It's not right. Something's not right when you're being ignored for 3 years and then suddenly nothing's changed.
Alarm bell should have been ringing after more than one person had named the person, Mr. Sewell. They should have thought, well, I know, maybe one person, might get it wrong, but not when 2 or 3.
Wales This Week has been told that Sewell soon moved to another congregation in Llantwit Major. It's also understood that the new congregation was not told about the allegations made against him. Karen continued her fight for the next 17 years. It was only when a 4th victim came forward that Sewell finally faced a jury in June this year. But once again, the court heard that the organisation was uncooperative.
I know there were letters going back and forth to the Bethel constantly about it, and yet when the court case came up, and obviously the police asked for all the paperwork associated with it, they were told that there wasn't any.
The Jehovah's Witnesses said the files had been destroyed due to the passage of time.
I was told back then that the society did keep a list of child abusers because they would need to, because if someone was either confessed to being one or convicted of it, then they would have to inform the congregation where they were, and also if they moved, they would inform the congregation where they moved. I don't see how you could do that without keeping records.
With Sewell now firmly behind bars, his victims are looking to hold the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses responsible for what has happened.
They did nothing, they offered no support, they let an offender remain quiet in the congregation and nobody was aware of what he was doing, which is why he was able to do so much.
Karen Karen is meeting with lawyer Kathleen Hallisey, who specialises in child abuse cases across the UK and the US.
The goal of litigation is to obtain compensation for the victim, but also our additional goals as a firm are to try and affect change in organizations to try and protect future victims.
The firm is part of a network that recently helped 28-year-old Candice Conti from California win a landmark ruling against the organisation. She won $28 million in damages after she was abused by another Jehovah's Witness at the age of 9 years old.
The issues are the same, really, in that looking to the organization and saying you're responsible for what's happened here, you had a duty to this person, and you failed to live up to that duty, and as a result of that, this person has been seriously harmed. I think it's a very difficult fight, but I don't think that it's a fight that we can't potentially win. The secrecy is a problem. The lack of documentation presents problems.
I don't see Jehovah's Witnesses themselves changing the two-witness rule. But I do see the government having to make them change, in that if the victim's law comes to fruition, then legally any accusation of child abuse by law would have to be reported to the police by the elders. If there are people out there who feel that they can deal better with these very serious allegations, then we need to be looking at that and at a government level.
The Home Office has ordered a major inquiry into why historic cases of child abuse have been hidden for so long. Now Karen and Auer have called for the Jehovah's Witness organisation to be scrutinised as part of that investigation. The Home Office told us it was still early days and that details of what will and will not be included in the scope of the inquiry will be clearer after the terms of reference are set. Karen and her father are no longer active members of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Karen was disfellowshipped at the age of 18 for having a boyfriend who was not a witness. John struggled after he was forbidden from speaking to his daughter as a result.
I've had to try and support her and also not have anything to do with her. And they're two extremes. It was about 7 years ago when Karen got married. I was actually invited to walk her down the aisle as a proud dad. And because she was disfellowshipped, I knew that I wasn't allowed to do that. But then also because I knew of what had happened to her in the past, I felt that was one of the occasions I needed to support her. And to cut a long story short, I got into trouble with Jehovah's Witnesses because I walked my daughter down the aisle.
Wales This Week asked the Jehovah's Witness organisation to comment on the allegations made in this programme. They did not wish to reply to each individual claim, but did say that they have an absolute and unequivocal abhorrence of child abuse. They work in harmony with the law and do not condone child abuse under any circumstance. They also do not shield from the authorities anyone committing offences of this nature. They went on to say that they support any victim or parent who reports this horrible crime to the authorities, and that such authorities have the absolute right to investigate, try and punish criminals. John and Karen do still believe in Jehovah, but they say the secrecy surrounding the witnesses has just become too much.
We've lived with lies for 25 years and we don't want any more lies.
In relation to the Mark Sewell case specifically, the church claims that he has not been a member of the Barry congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, nor has he been in any position of responsibility for 20 years. They say it is a matter of public record that when allegations of child abuse involving his family members first surfaced, the police were informed and investigated the case. They were also not aware of any congregation or one of its members obstructing police inquiries. Such would be contrary to their beliefs, practices and child safeguarding policy.
What they don't say is he was reinstated and has been in the congregation for more than 20 years. So he's been out knocking doors, he's been answering up at meetings.
When you want to believe in an organisation and in a faith, and you want there to be some closure, you rather hope that now is the time for people to say, do you know what, perhaps we made mistakes.
I've been contacted by so many people who are going through the same thing. People who are just now starting a court process, people who have never told, people who had no support. it's so common. And when I think back to how I was treated, and I think, oh, if I'd have been treated differently back then, my life would have been totally different.
I want you to take note that this is a 2014 video. It's from the year 2014. This is not old material. This is recent material. The leadership of the Watchtower Society has been trying to keep back from you some valuable information that you need to know, such as the things you're seeing on the screen right now. All of these are news articles, wanted posters, and so forth for Jehovah's Witness elders, overseers, and others that have committed sex crimes, rapes, molestations, and all. The leadership in New York knows about all this, and so does your elder at your Kingdom Hall, because they have received letters from the governing body, from the faithful and discreet slave, as they call themselves, that are marked as confidential, not to be read by the congregations, not even to be read by their wives. They know about these things, but they keep it hidden from you. Why? You see, I'm not making these stories up. You're seeing one article after another, after another, after another of all of these Jehovah's Witness elders and others who have been convicted or are on the run because of molestation, rape, and so forth. They told you this Watchtower Society was a clean and wholesome and pure organization, and the only way they can convince you of this is by hiding from you what's really going on. Are your kids safe there at the Kingdom Hall? Are you sure? Because when the kids come forward and when the teens come forward saying that they were molested, they're either disfellowshipped or they're condemned, they're called liars, they're put down, they're told to shut up, they're told that unless there's two witnesses, they can't do anything about it. This is not God's organization. It can't be. And those of you watching the video, look at all of these articles, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more, but we'll just leave it at that. This little video segment there was brought to you by jwstruggle.com. The issue of child sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witness group is something that has been going on for a long time. The original video of this was done in 2014. This is now a 2022 update where I'm adding more video for you guys to see that the issue has not stopped. It has actually gotten worse since then. In England, for instance, when the British government learned that the Jehovah's Witness organization was hiding pedophiles and other criminals within their organization and not turning them over to the authorities, they demanded that the Jehovah's Witness leadership turn over to them all the documents on the criminals that they've been hiding within their organization. As you see on your screen, rather than turning over the documents to the government, the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses in New York, which runs the entire group worldwide, sent out a memo to the elders in England telling them to destroy the documents and to not allow the government to have access to the documents. Now, why is this so important? Here's why. Unlike other religions, Jehovah's Witnesses are mainly known for one thing, and that is knocking on your door and trying to get access to you, wanting to come into your house and talk to you, access to you and your family. They like to be hands-on in coming to your house and knocking on your door. Now that we know that this organization has been hiding and harboring pedophiles and other criminals within their group and refusing to turn them over in many cases to the authorities, you have to ask the question next time they come knocking on your door: is that fine-dressed man in his suit and tie actually a pedophile? Or a murderer? Or a rapist? Could he be a pedophile looking at your child, hoping to get an opportunity alone with your kid? Could he be a rapist eyeballing your daughter or your wife or even your son? They're never going to tell you. Many of the members don't know who the pedophiles and criminals are in the group, but the elders know. The elders just keep it quiet because they're told to keep it quiet by the leadership of the group. And for the proof of this, I want to present to you this video clip from the Australian Royal Commission on Child Sexual Abuse, where the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses are being asked some direct questions concerning this issue of the awkward position they put a child sexual abuse victim or a sexual abuse victim in general, because there's been plenty of women inside the group that have been sexually abused and abused in other ways. These Australian leaders are going to be asking some straightforward questions about why it is that the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses put these people in such an awkward position that they have to have two witnesses that saw them get raped or saw them get abused, when that does not happen in natural society. I want you to watch how the Jehovah's Witness leadership dodges the questions that are being asked rather than answering them directly, because they know that if they answer it directly, they're going to look really, really bad. But by not answering, they look even worse because it's pretty obvious what they're doing. I want you to take a look at this video and come to your own conclusion.
Well, it's a pretty cruel way of dealing with someone, isn't it, who has suffered sexual abuse.
I could only repeat what I've said, Your Honour.
I know, but it's cruel, isn't it? To take away, by reason of the rules that you impose, all of their social structure. That's cruel. I think the real issue is that for some people, the circumstances will be such that they just can't stay, and they will find it necessary for their own survival, effectively, to disassociate. But the consequence of that is they are shunned and lose all of their prior social structure. That's the issue, and you heard the evidence that some people gave about that issue. That's the problem.
If I could, Your Honour, with respect...
That doesn't happen in other parts of society, generally. If they are so unable to cope with what's happened and the way they've been treated inside the organisation, that they dissociate, then they lose all of their previous social structure. Is that right?
That could be the case, and we respect their right to make that decision.
Well, it's a pretty cruel way of dealing with someone, isn't it, who has suffered sexual abuse.
I could only repeat what I've said, Your Honour.
I know, but it's cruel, isn't it? To take away, by reason of the rules that you impose, all of their social structure. That's cruel. See, someone who comes to you and says, I was sexually abused, but because there's no two witnesses, you don't accept it. You don't make that finding. They're left in a very difficult position, aren't they? If the organisation doesn't acknowledge that they were abused, that imposes a great burden on them, doesn't it? But if there's not two witnesses, you don't accept it, do you?
Because scripturally we're not able to.
I know. And that can lead to a chain of circumstances where that person feels unable to do other than dissociate from your organisation.
We are extremely aware of the damage that is done, where the victim, it's compounded by the action that we take, and in that context we absolutely agree with you.
I understand what you say, but can I just ask you this simple question? Why is it necessary when someone feels that they can no longer abide the organisation and has to dissociate, why is it necessary to shun them? Why can't they keep having social contact with those people who happen to remain in the organisation?
Well, we understand and agree with the point you're making, Your Honour.
Well, you haven't answered the point, but we'll move on.
The real answer to the question is because you say the Bible says so. That's the answer, isn't it?
Yes, that's our understanding of the scriptural disfellowshipping and disassociation doctrine.
As you sit back and you listen to that, you can see just how out of their league these Jehovah's Witness leaders are when it comes to Bible knowledge. They haven't got a clue what they're talking about. Their religion operates under the philosophy that whatever the leadership at the top says is to be followed blindly by the members. And if any Jehovah's Witness comes to you and tells you that they have the freedom to make their own decisions, even if their decision means defying the leadership of the group, they are not telling you the truth. Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to disagree with the leadership of their group. If you disagree with the leadership of their group and you say it out loud, you will quickly find yourself kicked out of the group and shunned by all the members of the Jehovah's Witness group worldwide, including your family if your family decides to stay in the group also. They will cut you off and treat you as if you're dead or worse. And every Jehovah's Witness knows that. But they don't tell that to the public. They keep that hidden. One of the things people need to understand is that the Jehovah's Witness group is not Christian. It labels itself as Christian, but when you look at its actual teachings, the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses goes diametrically opposed to what fundamental Christianity teaches. We teach that Jesus is God. They say he's not. We teach Jesus died on the cross. They say he didn't. We teach that there is a literal burning fiery hell. They say there isn't. We teach that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's how he presents himself to the human race. They say the Trinity is a doctrine of the devil. We teach that you can read the Bible and understand it on your own. They say you can't understand the Bible on your own, but you need a little group of elite men in New York who run their group to explain the Bible to you. The list goes on and on and on of teachings of Christianity that Jehovah's Witnesses just blatantly reject, yet they want to be accepted as a Christian religion, and that's not how it works. So people need to understand that. People wonder, how can they do this to their members? It's because it's not a Christian religion. It is a religion that revolves around the teachings of a handful of men who, whatever they say, goes. Now we're going to talk for a few minutes about this, what they call two-witness rule. This is the rules that they set down, trying to claim that they can't really prosecute these men who are committing these crimes because they claim the Bible will not permit them. They use mainly three sections of Scripture, and I've been a Christian since 1980, and I want to take some time to explain these things from the biblical perspective, and I realize that nothing I say is going to change what they teach. But I at least wanted people to know what the Bible actually teaches concerning these things, rather than what the Jehovah's Witness leaders are teaching as they regularly twist the Scriptures. One of the sections they go to is 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 19. And they skip verse 20 and 21. But I'm not going to skip verse 20 and 21. We're going to read it in the context so we can understand what it's talking about. In verse 19 it says, "Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses." And that's where the leadership stops, because they don't want the members to read the rest, lest they learn the context. Let's go to the next verse. "Them that sin rebuke before all, that others may fear." Now what would happen if the leadership of their group followed that verse, which comes right after the verse they hide behind? What if they took the time to expose these men that are committing these crimes? Then other criminals within the group will be less enticed to do their crimes. But they ignore this verse. And verse 21, "I charge thee before God and the Lord Jesus Christ and the elect angels, that thou observe these things without preferring one before another, doing nothing by partiality." And clearly there's partiality being shown within the group, because many times it's the leadership class of the Jehovah's Witnesses that are committing these crimes. And they don't want to turn each other in. It's a men's club. It's men all the way down, from the governing body down to the elders. It's all men. And the men cover for each other, and they protect each other. They show favoritism to each other at the expense of the members of the group. So they target verse 19, and they ignore verse 20 and 21, which would put an end to their game. The next section of Scripture that they run to is Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. And we're going to take a look at that one and see what that one says. And we're going to read verse 16 and 17 as well, again, to keep it in context. Verse 15, it says, "Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. And if he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee 1 or 2 more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be as an heathen man and a publican. So what's the Bible saying here? This is not dealing with a case of rape or child molestation. It's talking about somebody that commits a transgress. Rape and child molestation is a crime, not just a transgress. And they're saying here, if somebody commits a transgress, you go to that person and confront them. But if you've been raped by somebody, that lady's not going to be quick to go to that person. They don't want to be around that person. The second one says, take 2 people with you. Well, they try to do that when they go to the elders, and the elders don't believe them. The next thing is, it says, bring it before the church. Bring it before the congregation. If the person who's been raped brings it before the congregation, they will be kicked out of the group. It's happened time and time again. Time after time. The Jehovah's Witnesses do not follow this. They are not following the Bible. They pick and choose what verses they want to follow. I'm talking about the leadership class. They pick and choose what verses they want to follow. In some cases, they'll choose half a verse or 1/3 of a verse and then ignore the other half of the verse because it doesn't agree with their teachings. The last one that they use is Deuteronomy chapter 22. Starting at verse 25, I'm going to read down to verse 27. It says, but if a man find a betrothed damsel in the field, and he force her and lie with her, then the man only that lay with her shall die. Now this is how the Bible says you deal with somebody who rapes somebody. Whether it's a molestation or whether it's rape. The Bible says, verse 25, Deuteronomy chapter 22, King James Bible, stick with the King James. Don't use these so-called modern translations. They're a waste of your time. Stick with the real Bible, the King James in English. Verse 25, if a man finds a betrothed damsel in the field, and he force her and lie with her, then the man only that lies with her shall die. That's God's command. Verse 26, but unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death. For as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slayeth him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to save her. And that's the case of a molested child. They can scream and cry, but there's nobody there to save them. And God says the person who does that is to be put to death. Yet the Jehovah's Witness leaders, they don't go to this verse. They wouldn't dare. Yet at the same time, they tell people that their teachings are Bible-based. And I want to explain to you the way that the Jehovah's Witness leaders have twisted things. When they say terms like Bible-based, they don't actually mean based on the Bible. This is very important for you to understand. Each cult will have their own unique vocabulary in many cases. And when the Jehovah's Witness leaders talk about their teachings being Bible-based, well, that's not really the case. Because the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses has instilled within their members that the only ones that have the authority to interpret the Bible is them. The members don't have the authority to interpret the Bible for themselves and come to their own conclusions. They must obey whatever the leaders tell them. And if they don't obey what the leaders tell them, well, they'll just be kicked out of the group. That's how it works. And then they'll be shunned. And their entire social network and all their friends and family that stays in the group will not be allowed to speak to them anymore. That's how they run things. So their term Bible-based actually means whatever the leadership of the group says the truth is. So if the leadership of the group says the truth is this today, then Jehovah's Witnesses will say this is a Bible-based truth. If the leadership changes the teaching tomorrow to something that's the opposite of what they were teaching today, now the new teaching becomes what they call Bible-based. It is whatever their leaders say that becomes the truth as far as Jehovah's Witnesses are concerned. So when you understand their vocabulary, that when they say their teachings are Bible-based, it's not really based on the Bible at all. Not at all, not even in the slightest. There's a lot of things that happen within their group that is not founded anywhere in the Bible. Now, if you're out there and you have been sexually abused by a leader in your church, doesn't matter what church you're in, what religion you're in, whether it's a mosque, synagogue, church, hall, you have the freedom to go to the authorities and tell them what happened. The group's leaders are not going to want you to go to the authorities because in many cases they don't want their group to look bad, and that's one of the cases with the Jehovah's Witness leadership. They don't want their group to look bad, so they want to keep all this stuff secret within the group. But if you've been violated, you have the right to have your voice heard. You have the right to have somebody stand up for you and say what happened to you wasn't right, and they're going to make it right by making the person who did this to you pay. So I would hope that if you've been through this kind of thing, that you would go to the authorities, that you would speak up, that you would make your voice heard. I'm telling you folks, we live in a society today that the news media is hungry for news. And if you were to approach a CNN, an MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, New York Times, Washington Post, whatever your local newspaper is, whatever your local cable station or global cable news station is, there is somebody there who's most likely willing to hear your story. The Jehovah's Witness leadership has been going through a campaign to try to put the most positive face on their group, so that the mere thought that anything negative happening in their group would sound laughable to anyone outside the group who doesn't know what really goes on inside the group. And it's about time that the light gets shown on what really happens within that group. You just saw there these two Jehovah's Witness leaders. You just saw them trying to uphold their rules that they feel it's perfectly fine to hide these pedophiles and criminals within their group, and trying to hide behind the Bible as they do it. They give Christianity a bad name, and they're destroying people's lives and destroying people's families, and it needs to stop. I've never been a Jehovah's Witness, but I've researched their group pretty thoroughly over the years because they used to come around my neighborhood a lot, and I wanted to know who these people were and why it was that when they come to my door and I try to talk to them from my King James Bible, they didn't want to hear the Bible. But they will call themselves Christians, but they didn't have any interest in the Bible. If their group is really Christian, why are they spending so much time trying to recruit Christians and convert Christians into Jehovah's Witnesses? If your group is Christians, why don't you leave the Christians alone? I say the same thing to the Mormons. If your group is really Christian, why do you spend so much time targeting Christians and try to turn Christians into Mormons? Obviously the teachings are different, or you wouldn't be trying to convert us. See, I want people to understand that. And as we end this video, I want to give you guys some hope. What is the Bible really all about? Because groups like Jehovah's Witnesses give the Bible a bad name when you see the stuff that's really going on inside the group. We human beings were sinners. We're sinners by nature. We couldn't stop if we wanted to. It's built into us. And God in His mercy decided that what He would do is that He would make a way for us to have our sins forgiven. And He would make the way by being the way. He saw us in our situation that we could not help ourselves. There's no amount of good that we can do that's going to get us out of the pit that we're in. The Bible tells our good works are as filthy rags. Our good works don't mean nothing to Him. What matters to Him is that we accept Him as our Lord and as our God. And Jesus came down here. He took on the form of man, came down here and lived with us for some 33 years. Lived with us, talked with us, taught us, ate with us. And what do we human beings do in return? Crucified Him. That's how we treated our Creator. Whipped Him, beat Him, put Him through a kangaroo court, paraded Him down the street while people spat on Him, and then nailed Him to a cross. And the Lord is willing to forgive us for even that. He doesn't make it hard and say you got to do this or you got to do that, or you got to go to church every Sunday, you got to read, you got to keep the man. No, He didn't say to do all that. The Bible says, believe on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. You can do it today, wherever you are. You can just pray and say, Lord Jesus, forgive me of my sins. Accept me into your family, please. Fill me with your spirit so that I don't want to do the things that are wrong. And let him do his work in your life. Get yourself a King James Bible if you're English speaking. Read that Bible. Study it. If you have trouble with these, thous, and ye's, let me explain those very quickly. These, thous, and ye's, understood in less than 2 minutes. In the English language, we have the word you. The problem with the word you is that you can be singular or plural. The King James translators were aware of that. Therefore, they established a rule that in the King James Bible, if a person is only talking to one person, they would use a T word, thee, thou, thy, or thine. If a person is talking to more than one person, they would use a Y word, you, your, ye, or yours. That way, when you're reading the Bible, you'll know whether the speaker is talking to one person or more than one person. People say they have so much trouble over the these, thous, and ye's. That's the understanding of the these, thous, and ye's. It's the difference between one person being spoken to or spoken about versus more than one person being spoken to or spoken about. Don't waste your time with these so-called modern translations. They remove stuff from the Bible, they change the Bible, they alter the Bible, and they're updated every few years, so you can't really trust what they say because every few years they change them. King James Bible has been consistent for hundreds of years, and God's Word doesn't change. I'm hoping that this video helps people out as I'm going through my Hidden from Jehovah's Witness series, video by video, and just trying to update and add more information where I can, and just reposting it for people who have not seen the entire 20-part series. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. For those of you who have asked about assisting the ministry that I do here, I don't ask people for money. I just don't have it in me to do that. I feel weird asking people for money. But I do say if somebody wants to spend money, at least get something for your money. So I have a music site, jasonzelda.com. You can go through the songs, listen to the songs. If you like the songs, you can buy yourself some songs, and at least you'll be getting something for your money. And I would recommend just listening to the songs all the way through, because some songs may start off slow and then turn into a fast song, and one may start off like a ballad and end off as a rock and roll song or something different. It's a different kind of sound. I do all the studio work myself. I do all the work and everything for myself, including the 3D art that appears on many of those thumbnail pictures. And I just hope you guys will keep me in prayer. And I have the site set up in such a way that each song is just $1. But if you want to spend $1 per song, you can do that. If you want to spend $500 on a song, you can put down $500. Whatever you want to spend, you can spend whatever you want. You have the freedom to do that on my site. I'm going to do my best to try to go through the series over time and repost it here on YouTube for those who haven't seen it. And I want to thank you guys for taking the time out to listen and to watch this presentation. For those of you who have listened to this presentation, if you listen to it on your headphones, it's very beneficial to also watch it because I put a lot of documentation on the screen to support the things that I'm saying. It would really be beneficial. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to check this video out. I'm Jason Zelda, singer-songwriter, Bible teacher. Some of you have never heard my music before, so I want to end this video with one of my new songs called Safe Here in My Heart. I wrote this actually in my bedroom. I do all the studio work. I do all the effects and mastering and all the stuff that you hear. I had to put it all together myself. I hope you guys enjoy it. The song starts off one way and then turns into something else by the time it's over. I hope you guys will enjoy it. It was written as a birthday song for my buddy Natalie. So I hope you guys will enjoy it. This song is available at my music site, jasonzelda.com, if you like it. And until next we meet, I will see you guys down the road. Enjoy the song.
When you stop at the stop sign, I want you to know that you're on my mind. And wherever you may be, you are safe here in my heart. And if the light starts turning red, I hope you'll remember the words I said when I tell you you're beautiful and you're safe here in my heart. It's been that way since the very start. And you're safe here in my heart. And when that light finally turns green, you'll finally know what I mean when I say you're beautiful. And you're safe here in my heart. And if the sign ahead says detour, and you feel you can't take anymore, just remember the words of your song. You are safe here in my heart. You are safe here in my heart. Natalie, 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 Natalie. You are safe here in my heart. Natalie, 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 Natalie. You are safe here in my heart. You walk in and the room lights up, and I'd never get enough of telling you you're beautiful and you're safe here in my heart. And even if you're far away, I think of you every day, and you know you're safe here in my heart.